Alright guys, so we're going to be going over the history. This is my 13th take of this video on why the college football playoff stinks. In the second half of the video, why the Big Ten's the fourth best conference. Don't leave an automatic dislike for you Big Ten fans. Your average team, like the average team in the Big Ten's great, but I'll explain why the top 15, top 10 teams suck against like other conferences, good teams. Like, let's just say, I'll just explain it now. Like, I'm not going to explain the full details, but let's just say if a top 10 or top 15 Big Ten team plays a top 10, top 15 Pac-12 team, or they play a top 10, 15 ACC team, or an SEC team, or a Big 12 team, that usually doesn't go too well for the Big Ten in big situations. So I'll go over that. So, for the first half of the video, we'll go over why the playoff is a complete joke and is just a participation award. I know I'm talking in a very dramatic voice, but these games, 75% of them, 75% of the semifinal games are unenjoyable blowouts, and I'd rather just put on, I don't know, The Office or something stupid like that. The games are terrible because some of the teams don't even deserve to be there. Like the 2016 Ohio State Buckeyes, who had a great start to the season, but barely got out alive at Wisconsin, I think, in the fourth game of the season. Lost to Penn State, only beat Northwestern by 4 at the Horseshoe, and beat Michigan State by 1 point. They did beat Nebraska 62-3, but to be fair, Nebraska sucked that year. They're overrated as hell. They were not a top 10 team, not even top 20. They're terrible. And they beat Maryland in 2016, but let's be real. Any good team could beat Maryland by 30-plus points in 2016. And the referees and the football beats Michigan, not Ohio State, because we'll just put the defense beats them. The offense was nowhere to be seen. I was looking for it the entire game. So the referees had some tremendous penalties on Michigan. I think a lot of bad holding calls and pass interferences. And most importantly, that call about the first down, where the guy looked like he was short for the Buckeyes, and they didn't even bring out the chains. It was a horrible spot, but they made it stand, which was the correct call to the spot of the ball, but they didn't even try to make it right. They didn't bring out they didn't do any of that. They just placed that random spot and oh yeah, it's first down. But look at the replay. It's not even the right spot. We're gonna review if it was like a first down from the spot we put it at. We're not gonna review the spot itself, if you know what I mean. Michigan fumbled it at the Ohio State one at the beginning of the third quarter, which hurt them. That cost them the game. And then we got Penn State, a team that got mollywopped by Michigan early in the year, and lost to Pitt in their third game. But they beat Ohio State, I believe it was 24-21. And then the rest of the year against mediocre teams, they had no issues. They beat Michigan State by 35 points. They beat Northwestern by 14. I may be wrong on this, 14 or 20 points. I remember watching that game, but I don't remember the score. I remember Penn State, they beat them pretty handedly. And it was at Northwestern, by the way. And they beat Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship. So they're Big Ten champions in the quote-unquote second-best conference in college football. They beat a one-loss Ohio State already. And the playoff committee knows they're good because they ranked them as number 5th. And somehow the Buckeyes are 2. And they're better than them. And they shouldn't even be 2 if they're in the playoffs. They should be 4. Because they're terrible. And that's where the mistake is. The real playoff ranking should have been number 1 Alabama, number 2 Clemson, number 3 Penn State. And by the way, Penn State's better than Washington. We know this because USC, we don't even need to go there. And Washington number 4. And, Washington should have gotten in that year because even though USC was better than them with Darnold, Washington, before the Rose Bowl, earned it because they played 3 ranked teams. I'm not even counting Colorado because they suck. And they didn't really have any issues until USC, except that Arizona game. And then, in 2017, they got it completely right. I was extremely impressed. Number 1 is Clemson. We know that going into the playoff. They had no issues with any team whatsoever until Alabama. Alabama, they are dominating everyone until Auburn. And then, and you can't just put out a team of the playoff just because they lose one game. So they're putting it as number 4. That was a great decision. And number 2 was Georgia, a great defensive team from the SEC that did lose to Auburn, but they bullied them in that SEC championship game. But to be fair, Auburn did have some injuries, and they had like a big turnovers in that game that really did not go their way, and calls didn't go their way. But you had a great Georgia team. Then you had an Oklahoma team that had the best offense in college football, had a terrible defense, but it wasn't that terrible. We'll go into that later. And that was one of the best playoffs of all time. All the games were enjoyable, except the Clemson and Alabama one. And I just got nothing. That playoff was just amazing. But 2018. Oh no, my grandpa's gonna be mad at me. But Notre Dame got in as a number 3 seed. Notre Dame? Are you kidding me? This had me completely shocked. I knew Notre Dame was gonna lose to Clemson. It wasn't even gonna be a battle. 30-3, just the worst playoff game I've seen. Except that I forget the LSU and Oklahoma one. That Notre Dame and Clemson game was terrible. And Notre Dame, they had one of the easiest schedules in college football. They beat Michigan, which was a great team. They're 6th, to be fair. They barely beat Ball State. They got so lucky against Vanderbilt. I'm telling you. But Ian Book was a quarterback, but the rest of the season their schedule sucked, and they still I think they only played one top 25 team, which was Syracuse, and to be fair, they did play well that game, but against USC, a team which I'm a fan of. I went to that Notre Dame USC game. We lost to UCLA, a 3-win team. And we lost to a Cal team. Their defense was elite, but their offense was terrible. They only had 96 passing yards against us, and I think they only had 200 total yards. They're terrible. And they beat us by 6 points. And they had a chance of losing that game if we didn't choke in the second half. And they get away with a Pitt loss. I think they beat them 19-14, and then they beat Northwestern 31-21 in a very close game at Northwestern with Ian Book. And they get in as a 12-0 team, and I can name. Let me get out my phone. I'll name 3 better teams that are better than Notre Dame that could have been in the top 4. So, for starters, Georgia's better than Notre Dame. They did lose to Alabama. They didn't deserve to get in. Ohio State was better. Michigan wasn't better. They already lost to them. And Ohio State did dogged on Michigan. UCF was better than them. Washington was better than them. Florida, no. LSU is better than them. Penn State's better than them. No, not Washington State. Washington State, they're too one-dimensional. And that's basically the deal. A good amount of teams are better than them. So, and I'm not saying this in 2020 context. I'm saying this in 2018 context. We know a lot of these teams are better than Notre Dame. They still somehow got in. In Ohio State, I understand. I kind of ranted on them. They had that one terrible loss to, who was it?
More often than not,
I really forget. Who did they lose to?
What's going on in front of me and to my sides.
I believe they lost to Purdue. I remember that game. That game was awful. The rest of the season, they did have a few bumpers, but they bad games that they proved themselves. I mean, they didn't get lucky this time. They beat Michigan, a great team. Ohio State, they're still, I think, bad. From 20, they're still their offense was a lot better. Their defense was elite, but they got lucky in 3 or 4 of the games. But we know Ohio State's better than Michigan, than Notre Dame. Notre Dame, they could not play in a big game. Notre Dame, an easy-ass schedule, and they almost choked 4 of the games. They're terrible. And Clemson, they could have easily ran up the score, but they played really conservative in the 4th quarter. They could have easily ran up the score. And then we'll go into Oklahoma, and they should not have gone in this year either. And the team that should have gone in was Ohio State. at
That rotation where I rotated
number
from
whatchamacallit, number 4.
Boston right next to it, that was really stupid.
And I think the number 3 team would probably still have to be Notre Dame, but to be fair, actually I wouldn't even have it as Notre Dame. The third best team in the country that year, in my opinion, would be probably LSU. Even though they got dogged on by Alabama, their 3-loss team, but they won against multiple top 10 opponents. And Texas A&M, we can't even go into how lucky they were to win that game. That 6 overtime, one of the best games of the year. But LSU, they're the third best team. And we know that, they would not be Alabama or Clemson, but they would definitely put up a better, it would be more hype for the game. Ed Olgeron would have a better game plan, even though their game plan against Alabama went to disaster. We know that Ed would probably have a much better game plan against Clemson and Brian Kelly would. And the fourth best team was Ohio State, because Ohio State, they're bad, but Notre Dame's worse. It's just that simple. And then we go to 2019, and this is where things end. And this year, number 1 was LSU. And LSU, they deserved to be number 1 100%. Ohio State was Ohio State, I believe, was number 2. No, Clemson was number 2. I think Ohio State was number 2. Clemson was 3. But Oklahoma was 4. And let me give you some context. Their defense was still on and off. I think their defense was a lot better this year. It was like 70-something. But there's a lot of games where the defense was terrible. There's a lot of games where the defense was great against Oklahoma, but we're used to seeing 50, 60-point games from Oklahoma. Their offense was still good, but it wasn't elite anymore. It wasn't best of the best. Their offense took a huge step back with Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts, he did have a Heisman year, but they weren't putting up 50, 60 points anymore. So, with a downgraded offense and with still a pretty bad defense, there was no way they would even come close to beating, who was it, LSU. And I think the legitimate fourth best team was Georgia, but Georgia they lost, so we can't put them there. And I would have to either put Oregon or Florida, and I would probably put Florida. And this is because Florida, they played great against LSU. They made that a game, and I was impressed with their performance. Against Georgia, they pissed the bed. But Georgia, to be fair, when they did not play an LSU level offense, when they play, an offense that's, good, you have to be elite to destroy Georgia. Yeah, your offense has to be the best. But if your offense is, just good or great or even top tier, Georgia's going to shut you down. You have to be Joe Burrow level or Alabama level to even score points on Georgia. So the fact they made that a game was incredible because Auburn, they got dominated by Georgia. And the only reason why Georgia even won that game by 7 points is because from trash can, we don't even need to go there, but Florida could have been a legitimate better team than Oklahoma because since their defense is dog and the offense is downgraded, Florida had no problem scoring 40 points on Oklahoma, and their defense could easily shut down like Baylor did to Oklahoma their offense. And same with a team like Oregon. I just don't get it. And that is why the playoff stinks. They're putting in non-complete football teams and teams that are deserving because of their record, but not on the 4 best because there's teams that are better. And this is why all the semifinal games suck. And now the second half of the video. I know this rant's been long, but I need to kind of let it out because I know the next year's playoff will probably be worse because Ian Book is coming back, and they're probably, if they get lucky again, then they'll probably make the playoff and they'll get destroyed. Oh yeah, let's go. But the Big Ten, this is the second half of the video, is the 4th best conference in college football. The average Big Ten team is much better than the SEC teams in every other conference. But I'll tell you, the top 10 teams that come out of the Big Ten are terrible, and the top 15 teams are usually terrible. And I'll give you one example of this. I'll give you not one example, a few examples of this. The Iowa Hawkeyes in 2015 lose the Rose Bowl as the number 5th ranked to Stanford in the Pac-12 by like 40 points, and Michigan State in that playoff game in 2015 lost 38-0 to Alabama. Just they're terrible. Like they weren't even top 10. And in 2016, the Buckeyes lost horribly to Clemson, and Penn State, a great team, probably should have been in the playoff, lost to USC. And in 2017, a Big Ten team didn't even make the playoff, and Ohio State clearly got outplayed by USC in the Cotton Bowl, but USC and Clay Helton shot themselves in the foot too much with picks and fumbles. And in 2018, Ohio State wins the Rose Bowl. That's the one positive year. And Penn State plays extremely well. And that's an understatement. They lose to Kentucky. And in 2019, Ohio State does great. Wisconsin loses to Oregon in the Rose Bowl. I think Oregon deserved to win that game. A lot of people think, Wisconsin got robbed. And, who was it? In Penn State, they did beat Memphis. But the point is when the Big Ten, when they beat tough opponents, they're not in the top 10. Like the Pac-12, let's just say teams in the Pac-12, the reason why they don't get in the playoffs is because they beat themselves up too much. Because all the teams in there are good in the Pac-12. There's some Big Ten teams like Illinois, they're terrible. And they only beat they upset Wisconsin every 10 years. But all the teams in the Pac-12, they're great. Like Arizona State, they're a great 8-win team. So the top 10 teams that can make it out of a conference with the average team is really good, and they beat each other up, then the Pac-12 conference top 10 team is good. But the only issue is Pac-12, they have issues against the SEC. And that's why I think the Pac-12 is the second best conference. Because the SEC clearly dominates Pac-12. Against the ACC, a top 10 team, no. Pac-12 wins over ACC 100%. And against the Big Ten, Pac-12 has had a winning record over Big Ten top 10 teams. And against the Big 12, most teams in that conference are terrible. And Oklahoma gets out with no defense whatsoever at all. And they lose every major bowl game that they get into, which is the playoff. And they just can't beat anyone, which is really sad and unfortunate. The only team that they've beaten was Ohio State in 2017. It's really tragic, but that's why the Pac-12 is the second best conference. Because the average team is better than the Big. I know I said the average Big Ten team is good, but the average team in the Pac-12 is better than the Big Ten's average team, and they make it a lot harder on a team like Oregon, I'm going to put USC, Washington, Stanford. They make the games hard. Because when Oregon beat Stanford, they only beat them by 15, and Stanford was terrible this year. So that's really all I've got on this issue. Leave your comments in the comments section. And that's it for me. Goodbye, kids.